right.
Oh, I love it. And you've got your little MIT representation going on.
We've been running all over campus this morning. So I was just trying to look like I fit in. First of all, thank you all for being here. If you gals are ready, I will launch in here. Welcome back to Talk Fiction, the podcast dedicated to entertainment media's most overlooked underdogs, fiction writers. I'm your host, Meg Olders, author of the 2026 debut novel C. Smile and creator of the dynamic newsletter anthology Beautiful, Daring, Stupid. With me today are three amazing authors, each emblazoned with more enviable credentials and active publications than I can possibly squeeze into this intro. So I'm going to attribute each of them to the memoir that compelled me to bring them together on one podcast to share their wisdom. Joining us from across the pond is novelist and literary obsessive Eleanor Anstruther, author of A Memoir in 65 Postcards and The Recovery Diaries, a gripping exploration of wealth, survival, the questions that haunt us, and what makes us human. Kimberly Warner, author of the recently debuted and warmly embraced Unfixed, a memoir that poses the question, what if the very thing you can't fix is the thing that saves your life? And the Empress herself, Elisa Kennedy Jones, author of Gotham Girl Interrupted, a painfully funny memoir recounting her misadventures in motherhood, love, and epilepsy. I will share links to anything and everything these memoirists are currently working on, as well as ways to get your hands on their respective stories in the show notes. But without further ado, allow me to introduce my distinguished guests, Eleanor Anstruther, Kimberly Warner, and Elisa Kennedy Jones. Welcome, friends.
Yay.
And now I can take a breath. It's always like such a load of words. I have to get out in the beginning.
It was it's
beautiful.
a lovely
It was
intro,
perfect.
though, Meg. Thank you for
It
doing
was
that.
You're
perfect.
welcome.
Yeah,
And thank you.
thank you.
I usually try to do some initial research about people that come on, but you guys just have done so much. I would have talked for 15 minutes about each of you if I could have. But that's why I hope everyone will check out the show notes on this episode, because there's so much to see and so much to buy and take part in for all of you. So I'll have all that and all those goodies in there for folks. So this episode of Talk Fiction feels a bit rebellious because we are talking about memoir today, which is not fiction, but you all inspire me in one way or another to be a bit rebellious. So I feel like I'm in good company for this little offshoot. And this is the first time I've had three guests on at once. So this should be a fun experiment to see how this goes. The most I've had is two so far. So, but again, I feel like you're all pros at this kind of scene. So should run very smoothly. The first time I think I even mentioned memoir on this podcast was when I interviewed Carissa Stiefel in season 1, because she wrote a lot of one-woman shows, which she kind of talks about as being memoir-like. When you're writing autobiographical theater, it's similar to writing memoir. And I admitted to her that I have always found the idea of writing memoir to be particularly terrifying. But since coming to Substack and reading more of it, I'm just so grateful to those of you who write it, because I find that what it does for me is it reminds me that stuff has happened to me in my lifetime. Because sometimes you forget. And I think there's so many details in our past that could have been turning points for us, but we pack them away and we don't think about them as much anymore. And I think we get to a point in our lives as we get older where we suddenly want to go back and dig and find out, how did I end up this way? Or why am I like this? Or why are my relationships always such and such? So my first question to all of you is kind of a two-parter. And so I want to ask you, at what point in your life did you determine that you wanted or needed to write your story? And what did you hope to uncover through that process? And I'm going to hand this one to Kimberly first.
Well, I love that you use the word wanted or needed, because for me it was needed. It was definitely not a I really want to write a book. It was, can I swear, it was fuck, I have to get some perspective on what I am in. And when I started writing, I was still really in the thick of a at that point, a 8-year experience of living with a dizzy neurological disorder and also a complete decomposition of my own identity. And so, without many points of navigation yet, even I didn't have a diagnosis, I was still putting some of those pieces back together. So for me, it was a survival mechanism and largely a way to try to find a thread of meaning through the chaos because to me it had only felt like chaos at that point. And I don't think I knew at the time when I started that I would find that thread, but it was clear, and I'm sure Elisa and Eleanor could say this too, the process of writing, it almost forces us to get perspective and get a little bit of a bird's eye view on our life, and the meaning and the sense of purpose sort of comes from that. So yeah, that was definitely a necessity and not to be shared though. I've told this to other people. This was a personal process and it was something that I was doing only for myself and then put it away on a hard drive in 2018, never to root surface again. That was the goal. And then, as we know, it surfaced. Not, but for 3 years, 3 years, it sat there just collecting dust. And it was only through some nudging through my family members to put it out in a little bit more of a public way. And then, the rest is history.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you for sharing the timeline on that because I feel like for some people, getting some emotional distance from whatever they end up writing about is what they need. But you were in the thick of it, as you say, when you decided to start writing about it. And the desire to share it came later. So that's where the space happened for you, was
Mhm.
after you'd done the writing. Amazing. Thank you so
Exactly.
much.
Mhm.
Eleanor, same question. And if you need me to repeat it, just let me know.
Um, I mean, I echo so much of what Kim just said. It was need. I had to, but I had to offload mine. I'd been carrying around this a part of the story that became the memoir for a very long time. Mostly the kind of dropping out of college and going to India, and then running the commune. That was the bit that, and then the marriage in the wood and all that sort of stuff. So I was like, I was carrying that around, and I was wrestling with that, like what do I do with this stuff? And I thought about fictionalizing it and I tried to put it into novels and nothing was working. And in the end, I'd sort of put it aside. And then I came to Substack and just started writing it as a kind of morning pages every single day. I wrote a post, and that was what became the memoir. And the parameters I set around that was no planning, no researching beforehand, no looking back, no looking forward. Just write a minute, well, a published minute every day, which took about an hour and a half. So the initial thing was just to put down what I was carrying around.
Mhm.
But again, actually, as Kim says, what happened was that a story emerged, because there's a major difference between memoir and autobiography. Autobiography is an entire life, whereas memoir, you can write a memoir about your day, one day. That's still a memoir. A memoir inherently just is story. And in a way as well, I was thinking in your intro, this idea of fiction and non-fiction, and there's another word, unfiction and auto fiction. And actually, with memoir, I was telling my version of the events. And for all of us who write memoir, there's always other people involved in them. And all the way through, I was writing mine. I was getting messages from the people who were in it saying, "No, it didn't happen like that. It happened like this." So that was, that word fiction. I sit with that word fiction and non-fiction quite a lot around memoir, and it's up for debate, isn't it? I think. But what it gave me undoubtedly was perspective. I didn't realize what it was about until I wrote it, and I realized it wasn't about a funny story about setting up a commune and getting married in a wood and shamans screwing with me and all that kind of stuff. It was absolutely a story of survival, and it wasn't until I got that 30,000-foot view and I saw myself, like I saw all the decisions I'd made all the way through, and I was like, oh my, how have I never put this together before? So I mean, I think one of the greatest things we can do is to know ourselves, and memoir showed me who I was, and it saved me as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Elisa, over to you.
Yeah, I'm thinking about this and thinking about what both Eleanor and Kimberly have said. I was right in the middle of it as well. I was experiencing when I decided to write my book, I was 10 years into having adult onset epilepsy and having hundreds of seizures and having failed 7 medications. And I was wired shut, and my face had been shattered. On my jaw and face had been broken in 21 places. I couldn't speak. I mean, I kind of had, I was like, this was what I was like, what else can I do? And there were only, as I looked around the universe of epilepsy and brain memoirs, and there were only misery memoirs around this kind of story. There was nothing with hope. There was nothing that was humorous at all about this situation. And I happened to be in the city that is the most talkative, the most chatty city, the most neurodiverse city in the entire world, in the city that always has something to say at any hour of the day. And I couldn't say anything. And then all of a sudden, everybody was talking to me. When and when you can't say anything, the world starts opening up to you. And so I decided right then and there in the middle of that identity collapse that I needed to find a way through this with some humor, and that it was going to be my story. And there were a number of arguments with my editor about, what was dramatic enough and what needed to happen and what they were expecting of me and what I was hoping to write through this. And so it was a lot of detective work going back through my life to figure out how I got to this place where I was a 45-year-old woman who had totally had her invisible illness, disability, take away every aspect of what she'd ever known. Because I'd come into it as this perfectionist who was so driven to make everything perfect and have this perfect life and perfect children and a perfect marriage. And suddenly all of that was just shot to hell by my own brain. And I had to go back and say, what's happening here? And this whole like the electrics had totally shifted. And so it was a matter of, it was like comedic detective work that I was doing, going back and like, hey, isn't it curious that at the age of 4, I did actually grab an electric fence and get blown back in the dirt? And isn't it curious that all of these things have sort of followed me around, this kind of hypervigilance that I've lived with my entire life? So for me, it was, I had no other choice. I had silence or I had writing. And so the moment I was silenced, my voice finally started to emerge.
Fabulous. So I'm going to skip over my second question to my third question because you kind of touched on it here, Elisa, which you mentioned, searching for other stories that were like your story and finding just misery. And I know there's a term that floats around that's not particularly friendly that gets associated with memoir writing, which is trauma porn. And I'm curious because I know, Elisa, you admit to using humor, and I, as a reader of your work and of your memoir, I know that you do that so beautifully to just kind of find the hidden, not joy, but levity in the shit that goes down for all of us. But I'm curious for any of you if the term has ever been aimed at your work, and how did you sort of counter that attitude? And also, as a memoirist, how would you advise other writers to approach the telling of difficult stories if that's something that they want to do, so that they don't put readers off by, traumatizing the reader with their own sort of traumatic experience? And I could hand this right back to Elisa since she started talking about it, if you have anything else to add.
The only thing I would add is what my therapist, who is an amazing somatic therapist, and I would say titration. If you were going to write about trauma, titrating it in bits, spacing it out in the ways that make sense for you so that you're not re-traumatizing yourself as you write it necessarily can really help. It's sort of like unpacking a house full of photos. It's like you could unpack one a day. Just say like, oh, and sit with that.
Perfect. Kimberly, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm remembering, I'm trying to actually, I was just searching for the whole quote, but River Phoenix said something like, come to the rescue with love, and the rest will follow, or something along those lines. And I I didn't intend when I sat down to write to find the love in all these different scenarios that felt very um, unloving and had been traumatic for that matter. And I haven't been accused of the trauma porn, and this is my first memoir, and maybe there are people out there that feel that way, but I more than anything, when I've done book clubs and talked to people that have read it, there is a sort of a resounding experience that it's a love story. And I think one of my greatest intentions now, as I sort of reverse engineer how I did this, was to mine all those relationships for the goodness. And within all the foibles and all the mistakes and everything, but and to be honest, absolutely, like brutally honest from my perspective, as much as I can be, as Eleanor said, it's my own fiction. But I never wanted to walk away from this feeling like I pointed fingers and then didn't embrace. And largely I think it worked because I also grew up with a very porous personality. So I think I already was sort of psychically barnacled into all of my primary relationships and figuring out what they were feeling. So somebody, actually, I think it was David Roberts, asked me after this was done, did the primary characters in the book come to me and say that's not how it was? And in fact, I said no, not a single person. I think everybody felt represented really well.
Mhm.
And I think it might be because I was a quiet kid and I was listening and I was, using my tentacles to get inside people's heads. But ultimately it was to redeem them, to help them
Yeah.
feel maybe even more seen than they felt in their own life. So it was a real healing thing for my relationships.
Yeah. Excellent. Eleanor, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I had quite a different experience because mine, what I discovered as I began writing the memoir, almost, I guess, almost halfway through, almost two-thirds through, what I discovered is what it was about. And actually, it turned out it was about sexual abuse in my childhood that I had closed away in a box and not looked at. And I'd had the experience a few years before I wrote the memoir of that box opening in my head. And if I hadn't experienced it, it's hard to translate how extraordinary that is, that the brain can shut something away. I mean, and completely shut it away. And then one day, when you're resourced enough, it opens. But I had to be very careful writing. It's not clear that that's what's happening and that's what it's revealing, because there was a certain level of protection that I had to employ for other people who weren't in the same place as me. So there was that layer, which was complicated. And also because I know, having been through that experience of having the box open, the black box open in your head, if you're not, it was hard enough to handle that as a resourced person. But if that truth had been given to me by someone from the outside, if it hadn't appeared out of me, I definitely wouldn't have been able to hold the reality of it at many, many points, because it's such a head spinner. But because mine arrived from within me outside, whenever I doubted, because all survivors doubt they're telling the truth. That's an absolute bottom line. So in those moments, those many moments before I started writing the memoir, when I doubted myself, I could trace the line back and know that it appeared out with no outside influence whatsoever. So it was really important that nobody in any way connected to my childhood had those ideas put into their heads by me. because they would not survive the experience. Because if I didn't, I definitely wouldn't have survived the experience if they'd been put inside, even if it's even with the truth of it. So I had that going on. I also had the very difficult, and it's ongoing, it's still that very difficult experience where my reality is not, there's not agreement about my reality within my family. So that's another layer of complication that anybody has to deal with. So yeah, that word trauma porn hasn't been said at to me, but I absolutely know it's been thought. And so the last thing a survivor needs to hear is you're doing it for attention. But I know that those thoughts have been bandied about. And so you just have to, I think if somebody's listening to this now who is in that position and is considering whether to write about it, well, they're very welcome to DM me and I'm happy to chat about it. And it's about protecting yourself, protecting your right to tell your story, there's a whole load of layers to it. But so the way I chose through that jungle was to be pretty oblique. But if you're really looking, you will see, but I didn't throw anyone in the shit. So it was a very, very careful line I trod through it.
I don't think it felt like trauma porn, Eleanor. I mean,
Agreed.
Thank you.
you carry a universality in how you speak, and maybe because it's so personal, it's almost like the opposite has to emerge because it's so immediate
I
and
agree.
so personal that it all of a sudden transcends that. It transcends that.
Thank you. That's really kind.
And I will say too, with the ending, I think I uncovered precisely what you were trying to say, but I still, until you said it today, I still it was still a question for me. So I feel like if someone could be traumatized by that, they could easily answer that question a different way and find more peace with the ending of the story.
Right. I wanted to give the option to look away and have and practice willful blindness, because willful blindness, if you're not resourced, willful blindness is a really good choice. Bottom line. But I also want to say, with Kim and Elisa's memoirs, in that same vein, that poetic, but very personal, but to such a degree that it becomes universal. And I think memoirs which have that effect as they ripple out, you do get, in a way, the more super personal you get, the more you touch universal truths. And absolutely, Kim and Elisa succeeds at that.
Thank you for taking the discussion in that direction, Eleanor, because you all essentially now answered my fourth question. So I'm going to double back now. It's always fun because I have to sort of improvise because I don't want to ask the question that was just answered, which you did so beautifully. And it really was just about the riskiness of writing a story that's true to your life because you are involving other people that are part of your life. And you all touched on perfectly how you chose to handle that. So this is going to be a little bit of a shift. I'm going to say, so all of you are pulling double duty as fiction writers in addition to being memoirists. So I'm curious, and this is for my fiction writing listeners, how did the process of writing your memoir mirror your fiction writing process, and or how did it differ? And I'll send this one to Eleanor first.
Well, I mean, I broke every possible rule when I wrote my memoir. It was totally unplanned. I had no narrative arc. I didn't know where I was going. And worse than all of that, I was writing and publishing it live, which is like on every level, don't do that. So, but the reason I did that, there are two reasons I did that. One, I was in a 3-book drought in the UK publishing landscape. I'd been turned down my subsequent 3 novels after my debut had all been turned down, and I was really on my knees, and I just needed to break the dam somehow. So I employed Julia Cameron's morning pages, but I was publishing live, and it just happened to turn into my memoir. And then as well, I think that kind of immediacy really helped with the memoir writing, because I'd had this stuff inside me, and I think I was trying too hard to apply fiction narrative fiction structures to the memoir. I was trying too hard, and as all writers, I think, know, at least I definitely know this, all books already know what they are and how to write them. And it's our job to listen really, really close and find out. And we have strategies for listening. So some people are planners and some people aren't, and all the rest of it. But my memoir definitely knew exactly how it wanted to be written. And it did have a narrative arc. But I had to break all the fiction rules to get there.
Mhm.
So was that, I can't remember, that was the second part of your question. Was that it? Have I answered it? I can't remember.
I think it was, yeah, just if it was similar at all to like writing fiction for you,
No,
or if it sounds like it was the complete
completely
opposite. Yeah.
completely different. Oh yeah, and also with fiction, I mean, I'm writing a novel right now. I'm probably on the fifth draft. It bears almost no resemblance to the first draft. I mean, I will do at least 12 drafts before anyone sees it.
Yeah.
Whereas my memoir was straight out the gate.
Yeah.
So totally different.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Elisa, to you.
Oh gosh, so different. Except in the visioning of things. When I'm getting down to actually writing, I am seeing it like cinema in my head as I'm
Mhm.
working. But the process of getting it to Penguin, Random House, and Imagine, which was my press, my imprint, and my press, I had to turn in a full even when I still wasn't speaking, and even I was wired shut and had to go to meet my agent and go to meet, they were like, well, how are we going to publish this girl? I had to do the full proposal for a memoir, which is like mostly a business plan and a marketing plan. And I had barely enough followers on Gotham Girl. I think I probably had 30,000 followers on Twitter, just being a snarky bitch um, about things in New York and writing New York stories and writing about how now my doorman didn't even recognize me. They're like, do you live in this building, lady? And, and then looking up at the guy in the Gristides as my face was, and not knowing what was going on and seeing the blood on his shirt and going, oh my, and the pink and going, oh, Jesus, that's my brain on you. I need that back. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I was going through. And Penguin was like, I'm not sure we can publish that. But, you're putting that into a memoir, a business plan for the very stodgy Big Five is very different from how I write fiction, which is much more like writing television, which
Mhm.
is starting in the middle and making sure it runs and goes and does something and is feral. So very different from how I write fiction. But at the same time, what I wanted to bring to each chapter was that kind of like fiction sensibility that I still remembered from the days when I was writing more TV stuff, like that vivid, imaginary.
And in your memoir in particular, there was a lot of dialogue,
Yeah.
which I loved. And so it had that sort of scene work happening in each chapter.
Can I just jump in there and say dialogue is another really good example of how memoir becomes segues into fiction?
Hmm.
Because there's no way Elisa was going to write. She's going to make sure that dialogue was absolutely like script brilliant. You know what I mean? Like it's got rhythm,
Yeah.
but it's still true.
Yeah. And I was going to say, so I haven't written any fiction novels. My fiction background has been through screenplays, so similar to Elisa. But I would say, different from Elisa and Eleanor, I felt like my memoir had a lot of fiction in it because I mean I was writing scenes before I was born. So
Right.
obviously, it's an interpretation of stories that I've been told. But then I also employed an exercise of writing these fictional letters throughout my memoir. And these letters were written from different stages of my life and were obviously, written real time, but imagining myself as a 12-year-old writing to the father I never met, or a snotty little 16-year-old writing to him. And so now that inspired me to pursue writing more fiction and specifically in that realm of the father that I never met. So I've been playing and publishing a little bit here on Substack with second person stories where I'm sort of living as the observer of my father. And it's been really, really fun to feel this still feels like memoir in a weird kind of way. Maybe because I'm writing about him as myself imagines how I know him. So it's like I was just writing this morning. I've got a whole idea for a novel now about him. And I feel like I can very easily imagine him walking through space because it's how I would walk through space. And so it's a very fine line between nonfiction and fiction. And I'm happy to play on that edge.
Yes. That's perfect. As you were talking, Kimberly, the word fan fiction popped into my head, which is probably not where you were going, but it's that like taking the story that is yours, but sort of you're on the outside of it and like it's almost like you're writing spin-offs of your own story. Like,
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
Oh my God,
yeah,
that's a
which is
great
wild to
way of
think about it
saying
that way.
it. I
Yeah.
love that.
Mm.
We
Okay.
should all have spin-offs of our own
Yeah, we
story.
really should. We really should. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, so I'm going to go further into it and ask you all about marketing and promotion, which are like the two scary words for most creatives to have to think about because we all want to just do the creative part and create our stories. So I suspect promoting memoir is very different from promoting fiction because you're not just putting a story on the market, you're putting yourself out there to some extent. I mean, it's your story and you're standing behind it, that it's yours and it's true. And perhaps this is your experience and you can weigh in on whether it is or not, but you might find that any commentary on the book, good or bad, is personal or it's commentary on you because it's your story. So I'm curious how the process of promoting your respective memoirs felt or feels, because you're all still doing it, compared to your experience promoting other creative work. And did the fact that you were selling your own true story make it feel more precarious? And if so, how did you navigate that? I'll hand that to Elisa first.
Oh God, I was terrified. And I felt like a total whore. I felt like a complete, oh my God. I tried to follow the leads of people like David Sedaris or Tina Fey, and I tried to just do exactly what my publicist told me and just go where they told me and show up on time and be as nice as possible and just be funny. Because if I just had a few good stories to tell and gave them a few good things that they could work with on the podcast, and I would just say that tour events did not work out very well. I was always touched when people would come out and carpool because epileptics can't drive. So it was such a joke for me to go on a book tour because no one could come to see me. And no one could afford to buy. Like they marketed my book specifically to people with epilepsy, none of whom can afford books. They're all so broke, they're trying to afford their medications. I know this specifically. Our meds are so expensive. And it's impossible to go anywhere because there's no public transport in America. So they would show up one person might have their driver's license back and carpool to the nearest Barnes and Noble to see me. And I would feel like I needed to like bring them a pie or something to say thank you because it was so wonderful. And but also just like we totally missed the boat on marketing my little book because it was meant to be a book for anyone with chronic illness or anyone dealing with an addiction or anyone with a mental illness type of thing going on. It wasn't necessarily meant to be only for people with epilepsy. And so we kind of blew it. So that was, and it is hard. I didn't read any of the comments because they are always on Goodreads as your enemy. So just never read Goodreads. And especially they're cruel when they're like, why is your story important at all? And who the hell are you? You're like, I was always like, you know what? I'm nobody. I'm not anybody. I'm just a girl. I'm just not anybody, but I got a few things that might get you through if what happened to me happens to you. And you know what? Anyone with a brain can get what I have. So
Well, and I can say too, I feel like your book had so much to teach
yeah, I
to
tried.
folks who may not be directly experiencing what you're experiencing or even being but just to prepare people or to make people aware. I found like I learned a ton from reading your story. And so I think there's a market there too for people who just want to understand people.
Well, right now there's a new book out called Epilepsy for Dummies, and I'm really kind of insulted by it because I'm like, oh, I'm not sure we should do that. I think they should be reading my book instead because my
Right.
book frames it a lot more nice.
They should definitely be reading your book.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, I did try to take some teaching, but when it comes to when I deal now with as a publisher, when I'm dealing with authors and they're like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do that podcast. That doesn't feel like it's going to sell any books. I'm just like, oh man, when I was running around with Gotham Girl, if my publicist told me to go somewhere and go to a studio and be on a podcast, I'd be like, off I go. I wouldn't ask any questions. I'd just be like, sure, no problem. And I was just so grateful that they were doing anything for me.
Mm-hmm.
Empress
That's
did
awesome.
a phenomenal job for my tour. I mean, it was a peak experience of my life. I would go as far as to say that. And I think it was a combination of, the strategy. So it wasn't just people with, vestibular disorders. It was the chronic illness community for some of the discussions. It was the pushback on the wellness community and sort of understanding how much that's been infiltrated in our lives and how many women are really ready for a different narrative outside of like self-improvement. So we focused on that. And then we also focused on family. Family was such a huge part of my tour and the magic and the mystery that sort of emerged from the story that, I lived through. So that was a part of it. And then also, I think thanks to the dizzy disorder, I have had to learn to be very vigilant around my time and my energy output and the distracting thoughts. And so I knew all I could do was just show up and be myself. I didn't let the worries. I was like, you know what? This is already a win. It was how I went into this. This is already a freaking win. And then that's when I was, needing to be on, it felt like all of me could be there and all of me could meet the beautiful faces and the people that were reading and engaging. And it just felt like pure joy. I don't think I've ever experienced the flow state in my life, but I would say that 7 day tour was a 7 days of flow state. Now I want to recreate it.
Yeah. Can you bottle it and give it to the rest of us?
It was so amazing.
I wish we had seen the fashion photos in like your social media stuff. That would have been fun.
I know I'm terrible with social media.
Oh, good. That's my last question. I'm going to ask about social media, but not before I ask Eleanor about this one, about promoting your memoir specifically, how that experience was for you.
Well, for all the aforementioned reasons, I didn't promote it. But it so because my ambition for writing the memoir was just to get it out of my system. That was my initial ambition. And then as I was writing it, I realized the point of it was to show me who I was or am. And so that it served its own purpose. But my ambition, and I am an incredibly ambitious person, but my ambition for that specific book, that memoir, was it, just to produce 300 limited edition paperbacks and sell those, which I have done. Those are sold. And then that was just it. Because I had met with such a particular kind of reception close to home that there was nothing in it for me for it to be some sort of, bestseller, any sort of tour. I didn't need or want, I didn't need it to publicize it or want it to be in a kind of selling books successful. It was incredibly successful for what I set it out to do. It absolutely hit every mark I needed it to hit. So it was a huge success for me in my life, but I didn't ask it to be successful in terms of number book sales. And I didn't do any promotion at all. And that suited me absolutely fine. You don't always have to. I think it's a really important thing to remember. I meet lots of memoirists now, And my first question to them is always is what's her ambition for it? Because it doesn't have to be a #1 bestseller. You don't have to compete out there. You can say my ambition is to, and then literally there's no wrong answer to that. Whatever it is, that's what you go for. So, and that way you'll really enjoy it and it will meet, your needs. So that's what I did for mine. For every other book, I publicize the hell out of it, and I will do absolutely anything and every bit of publicity. No, I second Elisa. I'm always amazed if I meet writers who are reluctant or like, it doesn't seem like I turn up to with gratitude and an immense sense of luck. I turn up to everything. My God, somebody wants to spend some time with me talking about my work. Sign me up. My God, I will do anything.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a load of fun as well, Kim. Yeah, I agree.
I've been so tempted to even reply to all the spam emails, all the freaking Eleanor. You're gonna once you fall out. You're going to get spam every single freaking day from people that are saying, I want to do something with your book. And I'm like, I really want to answer you, but I know you're not real.
But I know you're a computer. You're a bot.
Well, thank you for everything you just said, Eleanor, because I think that's just another fantastic example of writers being in a position to rewrite what success means for them.
Yeah.
Because so often we're painted a picture of what it is. And if we're not meeting those metrics, we feel like failures. And the reality is you had a very different set of metrics for yourself, which were no one else's metrics. They were just yours. And you met them and you're satisfied. And that is a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So Elisa has to meet Brooke Shields in 6 minutes. So I'm just going to ask this one last question. Can we conference call her in so she can join us?
Can she join us?
We have to talk about her book, which is a memoir.
Oh,
that's so cool.
Fun.
Well, this ties in nicely. It's memoir day for you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is my last question, and it's about social media, which is another space that a lot of creatives feel uncomfortable in, myself included. I'm trying to get better at it because I have a book coming out now and I have to. But I'm finding that on social media, the culture now is everyone is a little bit of a memoirist in that everyone is sharing everything about themselves in real time or, just sharing things that have happened to them very openly and very publicly. And so I'm curious, in your opinion or your experience, how has social media culture benefited the memoir genre and how has it maybe harmed it? If you have an opinion one way or the other. I'll give this to Elisa first in case she needs to jet.
I would say I was just reading about and talking about this last night with someone, and it's this idea that you have to document and share everything without any kind of reflection. This is what we want to preserve for memoir, is that poetry and reflection and consideration and discernment. And so the art of memoir is keeping that and not just rushing out the door with every, part of your life, because it is about finding the story and finding your story, and in certain moments of trauma, restoring and reframing so that it can make sense for you, so that you can survive. My book was a way of surviving a very horrible thing that happened to me. So I had to make it what it was. Yeah. And it's what sort of echoing what Eleanor said, the book knew what it needed to be without me doing a thing. So
thank you.
All right, I'm off like a dirty shirt.
Okay, we love you.
Okay, sweetheart.
Love you, Lisa.
Bye, honey.
Say hi to Brooke.
Yes, give our best to Brooke, please. Bye.
Bye.
Okay, just hang tight, ladies. I'm just going to have this question roll through your brains, if you don't mind. So, Eleanor, your thoughts on the social media space and the culture around that?
Well, I think it's important to say that there's no limit on the amount of memoirs that can be written. Anyone can write one, and they should if they want to. And if they can make it the best they can be, all the better. And in that sense, a kind of glut of memoirs and memoiristic moments on social media, which is kind of what every little personal post is in a way, in a way, it means that the standout becomes more apparent because there's so many. So when something is really good, it stands out. On the other hand, of course, it's harder to be heard because there's so much. But I think the thing that's done memoir. So I'm not against. There's no limit, and I'm not against. I think social media has served some really great purposes as well for people to start exploring their own lives. I think the thing that's done it the most damage actually is the glut of memoirs by celebrities, because A, they're often not written by the person. B, they're often not very good. C, they glut the market, and it means for all of us trying to get trad deals or anything else like that, it becomes incredibly difficult. And also, if you're a complete unknown like me or anybody, you're not a famous whatever, the chances of your memoir being even remotely considered by a big trad publisher is completely zero. But so the antidote to that, and this is what I found, and this was how I found Elisa, and it's how I found Kim, was on Substack. And I didn't know them at all when I started reading their memoirs. And they are now my friends, but I would say this way before Kim and Elisa became my friends. They are honestly two of the best memoirs I've ever read. I mean, they're fucking brilliant. And that goes for the other brilliant memoirs I've read on Substack, just by people. And those are the ones that stand out. They're like, it's by a person, not by a celebrity. And then that celebrity, I know that celebrity is a person, but they're selling it as a celebrity and not as a person. It's written as a celebrity, not as a person. So for all those people, again, who are thinking of it, the memoirs that grab you are the ones. The fact that you're not famous is the reason to write that memoir, because it will be fascinating. I've never met a single person who didn't have something fascinating under the hood. And then if you happen to be able to write, like Kim can write and like Elisa can write.
And Eleanor.
So, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I would say absolutely do it and use Substack as your platform, because really fantastic memoirs are being found. And Substack isn't necessarily a social media site, as we all know. It's a bit of a mix and match.
Right.
Yeah.
And I found too, I've never been compelled to read a celebrity memoir. Well, that's not true. I think I read Carrie Fisher's.
Yeah, I mean, Carrie Fisher's is brilliant. There are some, right.
That was
there are
good.
some brilliant
And I don't
celebrity
even remember
memoirs out there, but
what brought me to read it necessarily. Maybe it was like shortly after she had passed or something, and I was just, somebody mentioned it. I was like, oh, maybe I'll read that. And it was wonderful. And what was I just going to say? I just stopped myself in my tracks. It was about, so I find too on Substack that it's getting to know the people on Substack that has brought me to read their memoirs. So it kind of went in the opposite direction for me. So I sort of found both of you almost like I just kept seeing you, particularly around Ben Wakeman's work, like, and you guys sort of like promoting each other. And I was like, okay, I love Ben, and these ladies seem really rad. And then I met Elisa through Carissa, and it just kind of all, for me, it was like the little bonds formed. And then I went out and sought out your work afterwards. But either way, it's that organic discovery.
Yeah.
That's so different than having like Kim Kardashian like shoved in your face or
right. And these really human stories.
Yeah, really human stories.
Yes, exactly. And that you can relate to. Like, I feel like it's harder to take a celebrity story. I don't want to say take it seriously, but you're like, this life is not anything like my life. How can I?
It's harder to relate to. Yeah, exactly.
There's something very genuine that's happening on Substack, and that's why I'm reluctant to call it social media, because one of the problems with all of the storytelling that's happening on social media is that it's performative. Largely, they're thinking about their audience. And I feel like that's doing memoir a disservice. And I can only speak from my own experience on this, but I don't think anyone should write a memoir and think about who their audience is. And I'm sure there's probably memoir teachers that disagree with that, but I think that these are not prescriptive stories. There's an embodiment that's not going to happen in the writing if we're already jumping ahead to the solution and the person that's going to be reading it. And I think a lot of social media is very much about that.
Well, and I'm going to just speak from a fiction writer's standpoint. It's the same kind of pressure. Like, I wrote 5 novels like it was riding a bike when no one else was looking. And then the next time I tried to write one was after I had kind of entered all of these spaces. It was so much harder because I was being told, or some voice in my head was saying, why are you writing this? Who is this story for? How are you going to sell this?
Yeah.
How is this going to appeal to an agent? And it like cut me off at the knees, where before I could just write. So I feel like those blocks are being put there in front of fiction writers too,
Yeah.
that they show up. Like you have to, it's weird. Like I've heard that now with agents and things like that, you have to fill out like these questionnaires about your following and who you're going to sell your book
Yeah.
to and where those people are. And it's like,
No, it's impossible.
for me, I can't think about that stuff while I'm writing. Like maybe afterwards. And honestly, I think most of us could use a coach in those situations. I'm like, no, you read it and you tell me where I can put it because my job
That's where I'm happy to
is to write the story.
hand it over to AI at that point, because AI will like tell me,
Yeah.
tell me who my audience
For
is.
comps and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to think about it.
Have you guys honestly uploaded like entire books onto AI? I know people do that, and it terrifies me, the idea of like
I
feeding
did
it.
Dylan. I uploaded all of Dylan's book. Dylan was the memoir that Eleanor and I had a conversation about. He is still alive, believe it or not, living with very late stage ALS, but not he can't speak. He's nonverbal now, and so when we got his book finally published, we needed to, do some press and PR, and I didn't know how to answer all of these questions for him. So I put his entire book into AI, told the chat who this person was, all of his background, and it answered the questions for me in quite beautifully. So much so when I ran them by Dylan, he gave them the thumbs up. So I think it can really be helpful, especially when we don't have the access or the desire to analyze all of that,
Right.
which I don't at all.
Yeah.
I think the only time you can write for your audience is if you're writing fan fiction genre, that kind of like, I get that. And then there's an argument for it. But other than that, it absolutely kneecaps all creative practice. You have to keep your eyes on the page. Otherwise, it don't work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think until if you are a genre fiction writer, even in the beginning, though, you don't have an audience yet. You have to build that with that first sort of genuine work, and then you know what they want and you can give them more of it. But yeah, interesting. Well, thank you, ladies. I'm very pleased that I got through all of my questions. I limited myself to 6 because sometimes I go on, and I knew with 3 of us, we could be talking for a while. So I thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to publishing this episode, and hopefully you all will share it with your audiences.
Yeah. And I'm so excited for both of your books to come out this year.
Yes. So Eleanor, when is yours? When is Fallout officially out? I know it's in pre-order still, but
April 21st.
Okay.
Is pub date.
April. And for those who don't know, my novel does have an official pub date now, which is September 15th, 2026. And all 3 of us are going to have our books paraded around at the London Book Fair. Now, are you both going?
Sorry. Well, I'll be here, so I'll pop in. Whoever, I don't know who's going to rep Empress Editions, but I'll pop by.
Pop by and take some photos for us.
Yeah, take pictures so we can share them on social media.
And I'll put them on social media. Yeah,
I'm always looking for things to do on social media. That's where I am right now. I'm like, what am I supposed to do in here?
Yeah.
Perfect. Let me just sign up. Hey there. Thanks so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, you can let me know by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, rating, or review, depending on where you're listening, or by sharing this podcast with your favorite people. Talk Fiction is part of a dynamic anthology of short fiction, essays, poetry, humor, and multimedia experiments written and produced by me, Meg Olders. If you're into the stuff I'm making, or you're just into supporting the dynamic individual who makes it, I hope you'll consider becoming a free or paid subscriber at megolders.substack.com. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.